Florida versus Newman Raja, a police officer accused of gunning down a stranded motorist. Chanley Painter has the background for the case.
When he had the gun pointed at me around the car and everything, I fired on him. He does this number, and I see his whole body spin, and I saw like a flash, a silver flash with like a metallic flash. Hey man, police, can I help you? And second,
That's Officer Newman Raja in the brown t-shirt and jeans. Dressed in plain clothes, he was working a covert burglary operation. It's 7:30 in the morning, just 4.5 hours after the fatal shooting of Corey Jones.
And at which point, that's when he jumped back, and I saw him draw the gun right at me, right after I said the word police, and it was just like...
Raja is walking investigators through what happened, telling them Jones pointed a gun at him.
I remember pulling the trigger, I think 2 to 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
And he started running. And as he was running, I had my cell phone and I dialed, and I still remember putting my code in, and just like this, I had the gun, and I'm keeping an eye on this guy, and I put my code in, dialed 911, and I called dispatch right away because my radio was in the van. And the whole time, I'm like giving them commands, I'm yelling, screaming, I'm like, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun!
Corey Jones did drop the gun some 40 yards from where he collapsed. Prosecutors say he was running for his life and was no threat to Raja when the officer fired again. 3 more times, one of those shots ripping through his heart.
And all I could think was, my kids, man.
It may have been an open and shut case if it had not been for this woman. Madeline Tolliver answered Jones's call for roadside assistance.
And then I heard yelling and then gunshots, and then yelling and more gunshots.
The call captured the exchange between Newman Raja and Corey Jones, seconds before Jones was shot to death.
Stop. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
The call raised questions about Raja's story. Did he clearly identify himself as a police officer? And there was that 911 call that Raja said he made.
And I'm calling 911. Hey, this is...
Here, he says he made the call while he was chasing Jones. But investigators say that call came more than 30 seconds after the last shot.
Aim! And I bang, bang, bang. And I fired.
Those shots, prosecutors contend, were deliberate, calculated with intent to kill, evidence of attempted first-degree murder.
At this juncture, are both sides ready? I believe we have a verdict. Yes, sir. Okay.
We, the jury, find as follows. As to count 1, we find a defendant guilty of manslaughter while armed with a firearm as charged in the information. As to count 2, we found a defendant guilty of attempted first-degree murder as charged in the information. If you find a defendant guilty of attempted first-degree murder, you must next answer the following questions. Did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant actually possessed a firearm? Yes. Did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant actually discharged a firearm? Yes. Did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, in discharging the firearm, actually caused great bodily harm or death to Corey L. Jones? Yes. So say we all, the 7th day of March, 2019, in West Palm Beach County, Florida, signed, jury, 4-person.
fired by the police. Shots fired by the police squad. Guns over here.
Will you please read the verdicts?
We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of second-degree murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of aggravated battery with a firearm, first shot. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of aggravated battery with a firearm, second shot. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of aggravated battery with a firearm, third shot. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of aggravated battery with a firearm, fourth shot. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of aggravated battery with a firearm, fifth shot. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of aggravated battery with a firearm, sixth shot.
So this is not easy, and I don't expect it to be easy. My findings are an appropriate sentence would be 81 months in the Illinois Department of Corrections, 2 years mandatory supervised release. Mr. Van Dyke, you have two rights I have to inform you of. One, the first right is you have a right to have me reconsider your sentence. That means within 30 days, you'd have to file a written document called a motion to reconsider. In that written document, it must contain all the reasons why you want me to reconsider your sentence.
Rookie New York City police officer when he and his partner were patrolling the Louis H. Pink houses, a housing project in Brooklyn on November 14, 2014. The two officers had just stepped into the 8th floor stairwell with their guns drawn for safety. A floor below them, Gurley, an unarmed black man, and his girlfriend entered into the stairwell because the elevators were not working. Liang testified that he was startled by a noise and his gun accidentally went off.
911, where's the emergency?
2724 Linden Boulevard.
2724 Linden Boulevard?
Yeah.
Are you in an apartment or a private house?
This is a project.
What apartment are you in?
Somebody got shot in the stairs of the 5th floor right here.
The bullet had ricocheted off the wall and struck Gurley in the chest. Gurley stumbled down a few more flights before collapsing on the concrete floor. Reportedly, Liang and his partner argued about who would report the shooting. Neither police officer administered CPR on the victim.
As to count one, charging the defendant, Peter Liang, with the crime of manslaughter in the second degree, what is your verdict?
Guilty.
As to count five, charging the crime of official misconduct, what is your verdict?
Guilty.
Foreperson will please be seated. Members of the jury, hear your verdict as it stands recorded. You say you find the defendant, Peter Liang, guilty as to count one, charging the crime of manslaughter in the second degree, and guilty as to count five, charging the crime of official misconduct. Is this your verdict, and so say you all? Yes. Does either side request a polling of the jurors?
We don't.
Members of the jury, please answer the following question. Is the verdict announced by your foreperson your verdict in all respects? Juror number one?
Yes.
One at a time. Juror number one?
Yes.
Juror number two?
Yes.
Juror number three?
Yes.
Number four? Number five?
Yes.
Let me say this. As I watched the video of the defendant entering the lobby of the Pink House, I couldn't help but get the impression that he was entering with a serious mind of doing a job of protecting the people of Pink Houses. Shooting that gun and killing somebody was probably the last thing in his mind, and probably never entered his mind at all. This was not an intentional act. This was an act of criminal negligence. And as such, I find that incarceration is not necessary. And also, as far as the recommendation by the district attorney for home confinement of 6 months, I find that instead of sitting at home for 6 months and spending money to ensure that he stays at home. I think it will be much more productive if he spent additional time on community service. Accordingly, I sentenced the defendant as follows. On the count of criminally negligent homicide, sentence of the court is 5 years probation plus 800 hours of community service. This is 500 hours that the DA recommended plus another 300 hours. So this will take close to about 5 months in my calculation.
The former Balch Springs policeman spent the afternoon being grilled about the 5 shots he fired into a car, ultimately hitting a 9th grader in the back of the head. Edwards was a passenger in that car leaving a party. Oliver claims the driver was heading toward his partner in a threatening manner when he fired the shots. His former partners already told the jury there was no threat. Today, the jury also learned Edwards was killed days after Oliver pulled a gun on a woman who crashed into his truck. Now, prosecutors alleged it was a pattern of behavior. They also pointed out Oliver broke department policies by firing shots at a moving vehicle. Oliver described to the jury how he checked Jordan Edwards' vitals twice and then backing away from the non-responsive teen, realizing what he'd done.
My heart sank. I mean, for a minute there, it was hard to breathe, and you just know it was just an awful feeling all the way around. You can't. There's no words for these things.
I have those, Mr. Gill, Mr. Oliver, Mr. Brissett, Mr. Lane. If you would please rise for the reading of the verdict. This is cause number F1718595-V, the state of Texas versus Roy Oliver. The verdict form reads as follows. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant guilty of murder as charged in the indictment. Signed by the presiding juror. Mr. Janacek, is that your signature? We, the jury, having found the defendant Roy Oliver guilty of murder and having made a negative finding on a special issue of sudden passion, assess the defendant's punishment and imprisonment in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for a term of 15 years and a fine of $10,000.
Walter Scott is at the wheel of this Mercedes. Dashcam video shows the 50-year-old pulling over for the North Charleston police officer who would kill him minutes later.
Do you like the Texas insurance card?
All seems routine for Officer Michael Slager until Scott exits the car once.
Haven't seen the car.
And then again, this time bolting from the scene. Less than a block away, the now infamous video of the shooting shows what happens next. The moments that would end Scott's life and put Slager's in the hands of the court. We believed early on that there was something not right about what happened in that encounter. That's what investigators from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, now say about the deadly use of force last Saturday.
Did you shoot Walter Scott?
I did.
That's the only thing he's said taser coming at me. I see that barrel. It's like this big coming at me.
Sir, do you concede that at the time you shot Mr. Scott and he did not have your taser?
Yes, after learning information now, I do.
One of the lingering questions is what Slager may have picked up and dropped near Scott's body.
I don't remember dropping the taser. I don't remember anything.
Well, you have a pretty clear recollection of what went on here. It seems like you're just not remembering the things that are bad for you.
Former police officer Michael Slager will go to prison for the killing of Walter Scott in North Charleston, South Carolina.
Sentenced to 20 years in prison for shooting an unarmed black motorist to death in 2015.
New body cam, and graphic is the word. This footage shows the chaotic moments after Amber Geiger killed Botham Jean in his own home. She claims she mistakenly thought he was in her apartment.
Former Dallas police officer Amber Geiger appears frantic in this body cam video. She told investigators she mistook 26-year-old Botham Jean for a burglar in her apartment when she opened fire. Moments later, you can see one of the officers begin CPR on Jean for 7 minutes, who is face up on the floor, bleeding from a gunshot wound. Paramedics arrive about 5 minutes later. As Jean is being wheeled out of the building, Surveillance video shows Geiger, who was waiting in a squad car, hugging and being comforted by fellow officers.
You all may be seated.
In the courtroom, Jean's neighbor, Joshua Brown, said he was heading back to his apartment when he heard the interaction between Geiger and Jean, followed by 2 gunshots.
Could you tell if one of the voices was giving loud commands like stop, police, or anything of that nature?
Yeah, but no, that wasn't what they were saying.
That's not what you heard?
No.
Later, Brown became emotional, talking about what it was like living across from Jean.
Heard him singing every morning.
So from in the hallway, you can hear his activities inside his apartment?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? You have to say it out loud, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Yesterday's testimony also cleared up some speculation on how Geiger got into Jean's apartment. A video was shown that showed her key did not work in Jean's door, but investigators pointed out his door did not latch properly and, in fact, was slightly open. There was no signs of forced entry.
You aimed and pulled the trigger at Mr. Jean, shooting him in center mass, exactly where you are trained. You intended to kill Mr. Jean.
I did. And I ask God for forgiveness. I hate myself every single day.
Geiger and your team, would you please stand? We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Amber Geiger, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment. No outburst.
She sat silent.